Support Resources Office, as well as doing some special projects for Interfaith as part of the Division of Inclusion and Equity. I want to thank the Kaufman Interfaith Institute, our Division of Inclusion and Equity, and the Interfaith Youth Corps for their help in having this program happen today. If you are really anybody in the webinar, just remember we have an election coming up next month, so make sure to vote. If you are a Grand Valley student in particular, just a quick reminder that there is a drop-off location and a place where you can register for absentee ballots in the Kirchhoff Center. Tomorrow, everybody who's registered for this webinar will get a evaluation email. Please fill that out. We really take the evaluation seriously as we think about speakers to bring in, as we think about subjects to talk about. So please take some time tomorrow to fill that out. At the end of Lama Rod's lecture, we will have a Q&A session. On the very bottom of the Zoom call, you should see a place that says Q&A. As the lecture is going on, if you have questions, feel free to put them in there and we'll get to them at the end of the lecture. I am really excited to welcome Lama Rod to Grand Valley today. Lama Rod is considered one of the leaders of the next generation of Dharma teachers. He has a blend of formal Buddhist training and life experience that gives him a unique ability to understand, relate, and engage with those around him. Lama Rod is the author of the new book, Love and Rage, and the co-author of the book, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. Lama Rod, thank you so much for being here today with us. I'll let you take it away.
Cool, thank you so much. Thank you to Kevin for inviting me, and thank you for the institution, for the university for this incredible opportunity to share this afternoon with you. Again, my name is Lama Rod. I use he, him pronouns. I live on the land formerly occupied by the Wampanoag people in the Massachusetts, and as well as the Nipmuc people here in what we call Boston now. But the land that the original community called this was Shamet. So I am offering this teaching this time from a land called Shamet, which is the ancestral indigenous lands of the Wampanoag here in the Northeast United States. So it's so wonderful to share this time with you. Again, I am, there's so much happening in the world, and I think that sometimes, it's so important for us to acknowledge that times are really complex and full and confusing and overwhelming, and just noticing that and allowing that just to be within the space with us right now. There's no point in avoiding it. So acknowledging that, and that's an important practice for me every day. I kind of get up and say, you know what, this is going to be another day, of a lot happening. And even as a lot is happening, I know that like my basic practice is just remembering who I am in the midst of so much change, so much chaos. I think sometimes that's one of the hardest things to do, is to remember ourselves, to remember, where we're at and how we are, to do these really basic check-ins with ourselves, because it's so easy to live outside of our bodies, right? It's so easy to try to bypass how our bodies are connecting to the deep discomfort of this period right now. When I come back into my body, when I check in with my body, I feel the anxiety and the nervousness and the confusion and the fatigue, right? And I feel this physical sensations of like, tightening in my chest and jaw, tightening, around my upper chest area, and sometimes that shortness of breath, right? Which, for me indicates a lot of anxiety. And just noticing that, so as we begin, I just invite you just to breathe, just taking in A deep breath through the nose and just exhaling. And allowing the exhale as we exhale to allow that exhale to bring us a little further into this moment, to bring us out of the news and to bring us out of the anxiety, to bring us out of all the demands and the stress, and the fear, and to just come back into this moment, right? And I wonder if you can actually also notice the sensations of your body making contact with your seats. Can you notice that as well? Something that I often do is that when I'm practicing with the breath like this, I just inhale, and as I exhale, I imagine that this exhale is slowly lowering me down to the seat. So my attention drops down to the seat, and my attention begins to connect to the seat. And the sensations of my body making contact with the seat. I mean, this is such a radical practice, right? And I don't use the word radical lightly, because this attention, this coming back into the moment is disrupting the ways in which we perpetuate suffering for ourselves as we get lost in the narratives and the worry, as we get lost in the anxiety and the fear, and all of that's about the future. Right? We're so concerned about the future. How are we going to get there? What's the future going to be like? What's November 4th going to be like for us, right? And even if when I say November 4th, there's a lot of anxiety that even comes up for me. I'm sure it comes up for you as well. What's tonight going to be like, at the vice presidential debates, right? You know, so just noticing that, noticing the rising of the anxiety as a mental sensation, as a physical sensation, but doing what you can to just come back to the breath, come back to the seat. Really, using the sensation of the seat to just bring us out of that cloud of worry and anxiety, back into the moment. All that stuff is still there, but we don't have to get so involved with it all the time, we don't have to get so distracted, because distraction is actually how we continually forget who we are, right? And distraction for me in my work is also one of the ways in which I have found systematic oppression to be reproduced in my experience, because as long as I don't know who I am, and as long as I don't know what time it is or where I'm at, then there's a tendency for me to get swallowed up by systems, of oppression, right? Systems of oppression perpetuate themselves, by forcing us to forget, right? Forcing us to forget who we are, to forget where we come from, right? To forget that we have agency, to occupy our own bodies and our own minds. These systems convince us to forget the land under us, that this land belonged to a community well before colonizers and settlers arrived, to Native Americans, indigenous communities, the First Nations communities, that some of us are descendant from, right? That this land wasn't invented by Europe, but this land has always been alive, has always been here, before some of our ancestors got here, well before some of our ancestors got here, right? To remember um, is really an act that's about saving our lives, to remember my name, to remember my joy, right? To remember that I have a choice, that I have choices. Even though it seems like I have no choice, I still have choices. I want to remember that. I want to remember my breath. Um, I want to remember love. Regardless of how easy it seems to shut down, to create barriers and erect walls. Like, no matter how easy that seems, I still want to remember the love. And for me, love means first a deep acceptance, a deep acceptance. And then secondly, love also means this deep wish for myself and others to be happy and to be free from violence, to be free from harm, right? And just to have this basic freedom to be ourselves. I want everyone to be free, right? I want everyone to have access to the resources that they need to be well, to be safe. Um, I want people to have this incredible opportunity to determine the course of their lives, and not have their lives determined by systems, that are only constructed in order to force us into ways, to ways of being that are really just counter to who we really are and counter to our deepest passions, right? To take away this agency from these systems and to reinvest that agency in my own will, in my own agency, right? I mean, all of that can be done through this beautiful, direct expression um, of love, and using that love to remember. I remember because love helps me to remember. Love offers me the space to remember everything that I have forgotten. You know, what do you want to remember, right? What are you seeking to remember? What are you distracted by right now? You know, and are you trying to come back to this moment? Because in the moment, this is where the moment becomes the basic ground upon which we begin to remember. Sometimes I say remembering the basics, right? Remembering the basics, and thinking about how hard it is sometimes to come back to the moment, to remember the basics, you know. And then maybe in a way that's so difficult because I don't trust that these basic, simple practices of remembering and these basic practices of love are indeed enough for what we're experiencing right now. You know, I tell you, I think these are the things that we're struggling with the most. We've forgotten, right? We have forgotten who we are and what we are and what we need, and we are becoming afraid more and more each and every day to deeply love, to authentically love. You know, even now as I say that, like, to love, this I still feel like, but do I even have to love people that I don't like? Do I have to love the people who I so like vehemently disagree with? You know, like even them, you know, do I have to love them? And I say yes, but at no point have I said that you have to like them. You know, you don't have to like anyone, but I believe that we have to love. We have to want people to be free. We have to want people to be happy. That love is especially for ourselves. We have to want to be free and happy, actually, in order to want others to be deeply free and happy. Because if people were free and happy, then I wonder how much less violence we would have to encounter and deal with in this world. If people were really free to be themselves, authentically themselves, to follow their passions, right? To 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 define themselves. I wonder how different the world would be right now. You know, I wonder if there were. I wonder if we didn't have a system like patriarchy in place, how many of us would be living very different lives now? I mean, all of us would, frankly. or racism. If racism wasn't a reality, how different would we be? How much happier would we be? How much less traumatized would we be? You know? So these are the things I think about. These questions, these kinds of contemplations are things that I do every single day. You know, the work of coming into the moment, the work of remembering, the work of asking myself, okay, how do I love everyone, right? And how do I allow myself to dislike? Because as long as I'm working on loving, I can allow myself to dislike. We don't have to be people's friends. We don't have to be BFF, right? With people that we don't like, or with people who have actually caused a lot of violence and harm for us. We don't have to be friends with them. We don't have to be around them, right? Setting boundaries is such a beautiful and necessary act of compassion. Compassion not just for ourselves, but compassion for the person that we need space from. You know, because ultimately, my ethic in life is to reduce violence, is to reduce harm. And boundaries become a skillful way in which I can reduce harm by saying, you know what, I need space. You know, And by setting boundaries and having that attention, that is basically an expression of love. I want all of us to be safe and happy and free from suffering, and so we need to get some space, you know. I'm not going to try to like you, but I do want you to be well, you know. But even after all of that, we can still want people to be held accountable for the violence, for the harm that they create. We all should be held accountable for the violence and the harm that we create because that accountability helps us to disrupt the ways in which we further engage in creating violence and harm for others, and we need feedback um, from our communities, from the spaces and places that we're members of and that we dwell in. Like we need that feedback to let us know, I may be out of control. I may be out of control. Though it's painful to be held accountable, it is necessary to go through that. So, welcome to all of those who just joined in to the session. I see a couple of people have joined. Again, my name is Lama Rod, and so wonderful to be here with you all. Um, I wanted to offer a really important teaching here that was a part of the description for today. This is from a dear teacher named Dr. Ibrahim Baba. Um, his clergy name was Shak Kalvadanjama, and Ibrahim was a professor of religious study, mostly focusing on Islam at the Starr King School of Theology, which is out in Berkeley, in California, in the Bay Area. And he was someone that I never got a chance to meet in person in life before he passed. He passed maybe 5 years ago or so. I met him during my own time in divinity school. And we just had a few exchanges online, and we had a really good mutual friend who had promised to really connect us, and that didn't quite happen. And so for me, he's become kind of one of my ancestors in a way, one of my elder ancestors. But he has this really beautiful quote that I think about and use all the time, and it's in my email, actually my email signature, as a reminder to myself of what he has asked, religious leaders, but also all of us to adhere to. So I'll just read that. This is from Dr. Ibrahim. And quote, radically subversive religious leaders or willing to challenge paradigms, challenge structures of oppression, to encourage people to dream into reality, new worlds. They put their bodies where their discourse is, and by doing so, they tap into the energy in the communities that's already moving. So, what I mean is those who are really willing to build communities of resilience, of sustainability that are counter oppressive and who engage in the work of connecting the dots constantly. End quote. Again, that's Dr. Ibrahim. Um, and I really just wanted to reflect, just briefly on this, and also just connecting it to, what I've previously shared. And not just about religious leaders. This isn't just about clergy and teachers and religious leaders. It's actually about all of us. Like how do we do the work of challenging paradigms? Challenging, as Dr. Ibrahim says, challenging structures of oppression, all to encourage people to dream into reality, new worlds. And for me, so much of my work around liberatory struggle, as some of you have been listening to, and some of you have read my books, Love and Rage and Radical Dharma, um, what I am so interested in is how to dream into a new way of being, because not only has systematic oppressions really disrupted the ways in which we are able to be with ourselves, to be in the moment, and to remember who we are, systematic oppressions have also contributed to the ways in which we struggle to think outside of these systems as well. Like, it's so hard to um, think outside um, of these really conditioned ways of being, and that can get really frustrating. I think about Claudia Rankine, um, and she put together a work, an anthology called The Racialized Imagination, and she and all the contributors really argue, one of the things that they argue, I think they argue many things, is that, it's so hard for us to dream and to write and to create outside of the places these systems have stuck us in this life. And it takes an incredible amount of effort to dream beyond racism and homophobia and classism and capitalism and so forth, right? And I think there have been great writers who have come really close to that, absolutely. Um, but to know that, like, to dream really is such a very revolutionary way, to be right now. And for me right now, if I just situate myself in this time, in this location, what I'm interested in is dreaming into a world where, what would it be like, as I say, stated earlier, what would it be like, to move through a world where there weren't these systems dictating who and what we are, who and what we are, and what would it be like to just say, what, this is who I want to be, and like having the encouragement, having the support to become who we need to be, right? Particularly becoming an expression of who we are based upon um, our deepest desires to be connected to communities and to be of help and to be of benefit, and ultimately to help to reduce violence and harm in the world. Because I think when we're our most authentic self, that is, I think, a really intense reduction of harm and violence in the world. Violence stems from those of us who just we're running away from who we are, right? And we can't touch into who we are because of shame and fear and how painful and uncomfortable that is, to be with, right? You know, to live in a world where I can just say, what, this is who I am, and I get the support in being who I am. But for many of us, we've had to fight to be who we are. And every day we have to fight, and we will continue to fight in the future, you know. But that fight is so much about creating broader conditions for many people to be inspired to dream more, right? So when we see people deeply embodying this very liberatory, open, vulnerable way of being, they inspire us to do the same. You know, I am queer identified, right? And I wouldn't be able to embody this depth of queerness if it wasn't for the example of those around me when I was younger, in my teens and in my 20s, who just lived their life, right? Who became an inspiration, for me, right? And without those models, that's what how role models function. They show us a way of being, and we try to emulate that. And I just wouldn't be here without the courage and the audacity of so many folks, that I was connected to and in a relationship with and in a community with, all the drag queens that I knew coming up as a young person who were just like, this is who I am, and all the folks who were loving who they loved without regard and approval of society, but they just fell in love with who they fell in love with, and how that encouraged me to be myself, you know. They gave me a dream of what my life could be, and I struggled to step into that dream, and that struggle has made all the difference. This is exactly why I'm here today. Um, so, in this quote in this teaching, Ibrahim continues that by saying that they put their bodies where their discourse is, and by doing so, they tap into the energy in the communities that's already moving, and that's, I think, one of the most powerful lines for me in this quote, right? You put your body where the discourse is. So what is the phrase? You put your money where your mouth is, right? But what Ibrahim is actually asking us to do is to step into the discourse, to embody the discourse. If we're talking about freedom and liberation and love, then we actually need to become liberated and loving and free instead of talking about it. And that's something that really bothers me right now about the times that we're living in. It's so many people who are talking about freedom, but people aren't necessarily doing the work of freedom, right? And they're not doing the work of love. We're being asked to embody love and compassion and kindness, and but it's so much easier said than done, and I realize that, I think in my position, as a spiritual teacher or whatever I am these days, it's always quite confusing to me what I am. But, it's easy for me to say, oh, you all just need to be more loving, right? You need to be kinder. You need to be more honest. And I say that, but I also know the incredible amount of work that's taken me in my life. It's taken me Um, I mean, almost 20 years of meditation, 5 of those years living in a monastery, 3 of those years being a monk. It's taken a lot of learning how to sit with my own brokenheartedness, right? And to love even that part of myself. Um, it's taken building a relationship and showing up for these parts of myself that I would really rather not show up for. It's taken that audacity, that courage, that willingness. But it's taken, it's just taken intention. It's like it's taken this deep intention where I've been saying, what, the only way that I can become what I most need to be in this life is by sitting with, holding space for, and moving deeper into the parts of myself that scare the shit out of me. You know, and there are so many ways in which many of us have come out in our lives. There's so many things that come out around because to come out means that like we're beginning to embody some way of life, some expression that seems countercultural or against some of the social norms around us, right? And we can come out about anything. you know um, One of the many things, one of probably the two most intense things I've had to come out around, is one, when I converted to Buddhism and I had to tell my very Christian family that I was a Buddhist, and secondly was coming out as queer, um, and third, well, actually, it's three things, and the third thing is coming out to my family that I had spent some time in therapy as well, because mental health and therapy wasn't something that was trusted when I was growing up. And so those three things were really these huge things that I had to come out around, but that coming out was really about embodying the most authentic way for me to be in the world, because I knew that my path was to reduce violence, and to practice benefiting myself and others. And that fed into the dream that I had for my life and for the world. You know, it's hard to live into the dreams that we have if we're afraid to embody those dreams in this moment. You know, and not that again, this work isn't supposed to be overnight, but it's something that we commit to over time, over the years, and the sooner we start, the better off I think eventually things are for us. But Ibrahim is saying, put your body pretty much in your dreams. Like let your body become an expression of the dream. And when you do that, you're tapping into energy, right? And so essentially what Ibrahim is asking us to do, or telling us, is that when we become more ourselves, we begin to connect to others around us in the community who are doing the same work. And when we get together, there's a momentum that begins to push us forward, into change, into bringing about the dream. You know, I think now about Dr. King and, the March on Washington, and of course the famous I Have a Dream speech. That's a beautiful example of what it means for all these people, Dr. King and all hundreds and thousands of people who got together. I've talked to people who were there um, at the march, and just like listening to them talk about being within a space where everyone was committed to the same thing, and how everyone's energy kind of swelled together to create this moment where where the dream, being facilitated by Dr. King, was opening up in front of their eyes, and they began to get glimpses of what it meant to live beyond the system of racism, because they had done the work to embody their discourse, and in doing so joined with others in the community from all over the world, really, not just all over the United States, all over the world, coming together to have this collective dream. And that collective dream making really helped to create really many of the opportunities that I have enjoyed as a person of African descent, in this generation. And my ethic is to continue doing that work, to push the dream forward, into a future that includes all of us, not just Black and brown indigenous folks, but all of us, right? And so Abraham continues in this clarification point. So what I mean is those who are really willing to build communities of resilience, of sustainability, that are counter-oppressive, and who engage in the work of connecting the dots constantly. So essentially what he's saying, you know, is that when we begin to deeply embody this dream, we begin to build new communities with others who are doing the same work, communities of resilience, of sustainability. Resilience meaning that we are able to continue moving forward, right? We're able to use a kind of skillful discernment that helps us to keep meeting obstacles and strategizing against them and keep moving forward to build, to create and build this sense of a new way of being, which is the dream. Um, Another way that I think about resiliency is like getting up. Every time I fall down, getting up again. Every time I fall down, getting up. You know, or coming back to the moment over and over again. When I get distracted, I come back. When I get distracted, I come back. That is an expression of resilience. When I'm choosing to come back to the moment, to come back to the work over and over again, right? And then sustainability, how do I maintain that over a long period of time, And that resiliency and the sustainability that comes from resiliency is really about self-care, right? In the words of Mother Audre Lorde, who says that self-care is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. Self-preservation is an act of political warfare, and I can give a whole talk on that, on that work as well, but, Mother Audre Lorde. But, how do we create the causes and conditions to care for ourselves, to tend to ourselves, right? To offer the things that we need in order to be well, right? How do we do that for ourselves? How do we help others to do that? How do we do that as a collective and as a community? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we care for others? Because I think that is part of the dream, is dreaming into a new world where we're just concerned for one another, like that we want to feed everyone, that we want to house everyone, that we want to make sure everyone's well, that we want everyone to have health care. We want everyone, to have access to food. We want everyone to have access to clean water, right? We want people to have access to good education, right? Um, we have to want that. And if we don't want that for all beings, all folks, then we have to ask ourselves, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I am one of the many people in this world that stands in the way of a dream where everyone is taken care of, where there's equality, where there's equity, right? Where everyone gets, the resources that they need in order to be well, you know. And when all this happens, as Ibrahim continues in that line, this kind of work becomes counter-oppressive. So counter-oppressive, we're not interested in dominating anyone or anything. We're interested in being in power with communities, with people. We're interested in being in power with the land, right? We're interested in disrupting domination, you know, and we're interested in asking, okay, what does the land need? What's the climate need? What does the earth need? What does my neighbor need? What does my community need? But we're also asking what I need as well. What do I need? Because if I don't have my needs fulfilled, then I find myself really like lapsing into this deep expression of suffering. And often when I can't be in relationship to my suffering, then I find myself reacting to the suffering. That reactivity actually is the foundation of violence against myself and against others. Because I cannot hold or be with my own discomfort. So I create harm for others, wanting others maybe to hurt as much as I do, possibly. Maybe we have someone like that as the President of the United States. Who knows? I can only speculate. Um, and this last piece, Ibrahim's teaching here, it's connecting the dots constantly. So this is the work of intersection, really, in terms of intersectional identity work, but it's also the work of understanding that there's an interdependence, right? That we are both individuals, but we're not individuals that happen outside of the influence and impact of others, other people and other ideas, that there is a kind of dependency and there's a kind of influence that's always happening. And so when we do the work of dreaming, we actually have to do a kind of expansive, wide open look at like everything that's going on around us. What we're being impacted by, all the identity locations that we're occupying, and what that has to do with our capacity to experience freedom and to work towards freedom in the dream. You know, Connecting the dots also means that like we're connecting issues with one another, that we're connecting racism, environmental justice with, patriarchy and misogyny and ableism and transphobia, right? We're connecting all these systems of oppression and getting to root oppressions, which is about domination, which is about unmetabolized trauma. Um, all this becomes about the ways in which many of us do not have the capacity to be with this deep innermost suffering, and all the sophisticated ways that we're creating to bypass that suffering, which indeed will create harm and suffering for others. If there's one way to talk about the times that we're living in, we can talk about the ways in which we're just really struggling to be with our own trauma, with our own pain, and the ways in which we attempt to bypass that pain, you know, consciously and also unconsciously, that really, in essence, creates harm for the rest of us, you know. So I want to kind of transition from here and really kind of move into some questions. Um,
Thank you, Lama Rod. I just want to introduce really quickly one of my colleagues as well, the Venerable Sue, who's going to help moderate some of our Q&A with you. But thank you so much for giving us that teach-in and for talking to us today. I know we have a couple people looking on Facebook right now, so if you have a question here or there in the chat box, I will get it to Sue as well as she's having this conversation. Okay.
First of all, Lama Rod, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your teaching today. Very
Thank
good.
you.
We have several questions here in the Q&A. We'll try and get to as many as we can. The first question is from Alize, who says, "Hi, Lama Rod. Thank you so much for your teachings and practice. As a Black queer practitioner, I am continually inspired by you. My question for you, how do you respond when someone uses or misinterprets the Dharma in order to perpetuate systems of oppression such as racism?"
Yeah, well, it pisses me off. I get really activated and triggered around that use of Dharma to create more harm. And, I have to fall back into my compassion. First of all, that compassion is for myself, and I begin by just touching into my deep discomfort, because beneath the anger is the hurt. I'm hurt that someone would use these transformative teachings to create more harm in the world. So I have to touch that, hold space for it. Then I have to hold space for this person who's using the Dharma in such a harmful way. I've heard many, many harmful ways in which Dharma can be used against, particularly, BIPOC, particularly, and even more particular, Black folks, and I've been so hurt by that. But, my work is to call out people as much as I can, but also to do the work of creating spaces and rhetoric. And in the way Ibrahim was talking about creating discourses and rhetoric, that are about a more liberated way of being. And I hope that I've been doing that in my work, and I will continue as long as I can to do that. I know that part of my work in this world is to help people, to give people a different vision of what being, for instance, Black and queer and Buddhist looks like. That you can be yourself and still be committed to nonviolence, and you can still be yourself and still be sassy and difficult and attitudinal and all the things that we love to be in the community, but we also can be really loving and compassionate. That we're not trying to become meek and mild and quiet and passive like the narrative or the stereotype of a Buddhist is, but we're becoming more ourselves. That means if you're loud, then, and you're a practitioner, that means you're a loud practitioner. If you're sassy, that means you're a sassy practitioner, right? If you are a sex positive practitioner, you're a sex positive practitioner. It doesn't matter. We're just trying to become more ourselves. And in the future, we will see ourselves reflected more, in the practice communities as well. So thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate that.
This next question from Michael popped into the Q&A right about the time you were talking about love everyone,
Okay.
but still hold people accountable.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Michael writes, what about forgiveness?
Yeah.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, where there is no forgiveness, there can be no love.
Yep. Yeah, you can forgive people. Absolutely. Forgiveness is such an important part of this. And I can forgive people, but they can still be out of control. So this is where accountability comes into play. We have to disrupt violence, not just in like the world in general, but we start with our relationships, we start with our lives, and we say, I forgive you, but you're still out of control. So what else do we need to do? So absolutely forgiveness is a key part of that. But I want to get even more precise with it. I think we should first forgive ourselves. There's a way in which we blame ourselves for being victims of violence, and we have to do sometimes, often, not sometimes, but often, when something happens to us, sometimes we just blame ourselves. Why did I turn down that street, right? Why was I going 5 miles past the speed limit? Why was I wearing a black hoodie walking down the street around cops? I mean, this is where I'm coming from, right? So I just blame myself and I try to police myself. But at some point I have to move out of that and say, you know what, I am being myself. So I'm going to forgive myself. Once I do that, then I'm able to hold space for the person who's actually trying to create harm for me or who has created harm, But at the same time, love also says that, like, maybe the most loving thing that I can do is disrupt the ways in which you're creating suffering for others, you know, through whatever means that may be, you know. So, even Dr. King was heading into that radicalism in a really quick way before he was conveniently taken from us, you know. Yeah. So thank you for that question. I hope to write about that forgiveness more in my next book as well.
This next question is from Brian, who asks, the 60s saw religious and spiritual leaders like Thich Nhat Hanh, Abraham Heschel, Dorothy Day.
Mm-hmm.
Discourse was in the civil rights movement. But today, religious and spiritual leaders and communities have hid behind social media as their action.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What do you think has changed?
Yeah. Well, some of you may or may not know that I am a devotee to Dorothy Day. And so her rhetoric, her discourse deeply transformed me in my early 20s as I entered into the Catholic worker movement. Yes, with social media activism, like, it's easier. We don't risk anything anymore. Social media makes it really easy for us not to risk anything. And when we put our bodies out there, as Ibrahim was actually teaching us, it's when religious leaders put their body in the discourse, that's where the change is ignited, because we're joining with others also putting their bodies out there. Our bodies are creating, like, the real change. Yes, and we need the discourse, we need the rhetoric, but it's our bodies entering it coming together in that rhetoric and that discourse is really creating change. So yeah, um, so easy to hide behind social media, but yeah, I mean, I think it also speaks to the ways in which many of us don't know how to struggle anymore. There was a different kind of struggle in these early movements, in the civil rights movement, and the Black Power movement, the suffrage movement, and the abolitionist movement. Of course, abolition is still going on. There's a way in which things were just in front of their faces, and they had to deal with it. It's a lot of religious leaders have a level of privilege and comfort right now that doesn't really. It makes it harder for them to go to the front lines, the edges of their work. So.
The next question is from an anonymous attendee.
Okay.
Are we spiritual beings having a human experience, or merely part of a physical experience and that is it?
I believe that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I would also argue that like this human experience is also spiritual as well. And that's what Buddhism has helped me to understand, is that just showing up to the moment is actually a very transcendent experience, right? It doesn't mean that I'm being transported out of the relative into the ultimate, but I'm understanding that like the roots of the divine or the roots of the ultimate is somehow in this moment, in this body, in this breath. And that's the staging ground. That's the foundation from which I'm able to move into a deeper, more transformative experience.
And another question from an anonymous attendee.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to being a Buddhist rather than a Hindu, Zoroastrian, Christian, Muslim, or Baha'i?
Well, I had studied all of those paths, and then I grew up Christian, and in my early 20s, particularly as I was getting close to the end of undergrad, I really consciously began to leave Christianity. And I thought I was drifting into Islam, actually. And I ended up moving into a community, a Catholic worker community where everyone was actually Buddhists. And there were a handful of Catholics in the extended community, but most of the people were practicing Buddhist, and that gave me a direct kind of view and relationship with Buddhism and Dharma. And I saw really incredibly talented, committed activists who were also Dharma practitioners. And that so deeply inspired me, to take up that practice. But ultimately, what I was looking for was some kind of a practice that helped me to understand my mind. So I knew that my mind was the issue, the way that I thought. The hate, the doubt, the fear, all of that was just really overwhelming for me. So I began to understand that meditation was really my path of liberation, a tradition that was about the science of the mind. And so that drew me deeper into Buddhism. And then after Buddhism, after many years of Buddhism, I started actually coming back into Hinduism and Vedic studies as well. So I combine, so I identify as a tantric practitioner, which basically means that I'm a student of Southeast Indian, Southeast Asian religious and spiritual traditions, which is just tantric, So I'm a student of tantra and a teacher of tantra. So.
And we have time for one more question.
Okay.
You mentioned love everyone.
Yes.
You don't have to like them, but love everyone.
Yes.
So from a Buddhist point of view, how can we get to the point where we can love someone who can't see the humanity in us?
Well, because we're doing the work first and foremost to see our own humanity. You know, I'm not loving someone's humanity. I'm loving through my humanity, you know? So because I'm loving through my humanity, I'm able to connect to other people's humanity. You know, so as long as I'm seated in that connection to my own humanity, I can sense humanity around me. And this is why I don't necessarily believe in this word called evil or calling people evil, you know, because I think that's a really lazy way, you know, of being in the world, you know, because it takes responsibility away from us to really understand people. Because when we label people evil, we're like, well, they're just hopeless. They're just evil. Being evil is a finite place that I don't have to deal with because they're hopeless, you know. But instead, I say people are just lost in delusion. They're lost in their ignorance. They're lost in their trauma. And that is a human expression, being lost in the pain and responding to that pain through violence. Yes, that's very human. So I can connect to that more and more. So I'm not, you know, I'm not interested in people loving me, you know, because not everyone will love you, and certainly not everyone's going to like you know, but I'm interested in remembering people's intrinsic, innate humanity. Because as long as I remember that, I know that there's a capacity for love if I can remember their humanity. I may not see it in this life, you know, but I know that that is there because I know it's there for myself. You know, and Buddhism says nothing about liking anyone. That's not one of the Buddhist teachings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you both so much. Lama Rod, if our participants wanted to stay in touch with you, what's the best way to find you on social media, your website? Where can they
Yeah.
get the books?
Yeah, lamarod.com. You know, I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but I think Facebook is trash, so I don't really do much with that these days. Um, my whole schedule is on my website, you know, so that's how you can stay connected to programs and teachings that I'm doing. Most of my programming, particularly if it's on my website, is all public, I know as well. So, but yeah, and follow me on social media as well. So those are the best ways to stay connected.
Thank you again so much for being here and being with us and talking with us today. Just some last housekeeping things on our end. We would love for anybody on the webinar, we would love to see you at other Kaufman Interfaith events. We have an Interfaith movie discussion coming up on October 20th, a Dia de los Muertos event on November 2nd, and our Interfaith Thanksgiving celebration the Monday before Thanksgiving. Registration for all of that is required, and you can find it on the Kaufman's website. Tomorrow, like I said, we will be sending out an eval. Please fill it out. It helps us as we think through our interfaith leadership lectures, so we can bring in great speakers like Lama Rod in the future. Thank you all so much for joining us today.